And my specialties are grief, loss, death, dying, and dementia because I'm all the fun all the time. I love to do education for therapists and funeral directors and people in general about how to cope with, how to deal with, how not to do grief.
I think I was honored, like I told you, I was honored and privileged because unfortunately, like I lost two family members to vehicle related accidents, and I also lost people to suicides and cancer and whatnot. I I'm from Kauai, but I left and came back, and I just joined the task force for prevention to suicide.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I just went to a national loss team convention this last year and presented there. And it's an amazing program. They do so much with postvention.
Really?
So
Okay.
after a suicide, there aren't more suicide losses in the family. And working with folks who'd had suicide losses was just such an amazing experience.
Okay, I need to know more information. Yeah, because like the executive, the lead director for Kauai for mental health, she leads our task force.
Yeah, the Lost Team is a program that started off in Louisiana, and the man who put it together is still part of it. And they'll come and do the trainings anywhere anyone wants the training.
Really?
And it's designed so that when the coroner is called out, because the coroner always has to go no matter where you are in the country, when there's a suicide loss, they also put out a lost team member and trained officers so that everybody who meets that family in that moment in time knows what words to say and not to say. And then that lost team member is with that person until they no longer need them all the way through the grief process.
Wow.
How to find a therapist if they want one, where the support groups are, planning funerals, all of it. They are there, and most of them have had a suicide loss, so they have actually walked the steps, although everyone's loss is unique and different.
That's awesome because like over here, there's only a few handful of people. One of the questions that we were talking about in our last meeting was, is there a way, or do you know a way that people track it so then they know like what age bracket or what part of the island, and so we're still trying to figure out a way to create some kind of like a tracker. We don't need to know names, we just need to kind of have an idea of maybe the age and the areas, because then we can provide more services for mental health.
They should be able to track that by death certificates through the coroner's office on each island.
Okay.
And as I understand, each island is its own county. So each county should have the stats on where people are dying and what ages and what from.
Okay.
Which is also, we track things like cancer clusters and whatnot, all the fun good stuff. But they can also track how old people are when they're dying of certain deaths.
Okay, I'll talk to, because they're trying to figure out going through a certain department, but confidentiality, and so then it was kind of like a hands off. But then we know that there's needs in the community. Well,
and you need to target the groups that are at the highest risk.
Because we're fortunate. There's a lot of nonprofits on Kauai that wanna meet the needs of like emotional support, financial support, whatever support, in hope to deter suicides, to deter domestic violence, and to not let people who have a mental illness feel like they're isolated,
all by themselves.
Or like even like the LGBT community, like to feel loved and accepted. Right,
because there are some definite cultural barriers, and each island is so different. But Kauai is such a unique island, and the population is so unique, and there needs to be a group that is culturally proficient, who can speak the language and not be offensive, but to get the word out that mental health issues are just mental health issues. It's like having diabetes. It's just something that your brain does and you need to cope with, and there's help and meds available.
and like there's like no shame.
No shame at all. You shouldn't be ashamed of having diabetes. You shouldn't be ashamed of having heart disease, and you shouldn't be ashamed if you've got mental health issues. You should treat them.
Exactly. As far as like with the grief and the loss, why do you feel like this is important to you? Because you've been doing it for a long time.
I started out with hospice. So I did child protective services for a long time, but I also did hospice in 2 states. And when I did hospice, I did pediatric hospice in Florida.
Wow.
And lots of people go, oh, that's ew. I love doing hospice work because it's such a unique thing to be able to sit with a family to help someone prepare for their death, including children, and then to walk with the family after the death. I've made pancakes for families in their jammies while someone who's just died is sitting in the living room still, and we're waiting for the mortuary to arrive, and we tell stories. And we should be able to treat loss like that. And therapists should, in particular, should know how to do loss, and so should ministers. And so should people who hold themselves out as doing grief support in various places. And what happens is people don't know. They have a kind of an assumption of what the knowledge is, and it always goes back to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in 5 Stages. And her stuff is fabulous for when someone is preparing for death, because those 5 stages were written for someone who's anticipating their own death, and for the family to understand what they're going through as they prepare for their death. They're not meant for after a death. After a death, you're dealing with the entire thing is different. And most people and most therapists, because I skulk around in therapist groups on Facebook all the time
to see
what people are saying. And someone will post in one of the private groups, I'm seeing a grief client for the first time today. What do I do? And first of all, that always is like sort of heart-wrenching to me. And then secondly, they'll say things like, oh, just tell them it'll last forever. Time will make it better. And I just...
It does.
I want to gnash my teeth because it doesn't last forever. It doesn't have to. It does if you don't deal with it. We have statistics, real statistics from real universities that show that if someone reorganizes their life, especially if someone's dying of an illness, if they start reorganizing before that person dies, and then they are allowed to continue it and allowed to do it on their schedule, and people don't try to interfere in their boundaries, that they can reorganize. They take the person who really died as they really were, not some angelic version of them like we talked about. And they take them with them into their new life so they can continue to introduce them to new people in their life who never met the person who died. Because you don't leave that person behind. You never say things like, you're going to get over it, or it's time to be done. Because you finish, but they're always there with you, and you always talk to them. You know, when I meet a client for the first time, one of the things I always say is, so when was the last time you talked to them? And they always go, you know? Like, of course, everybody talks to the person who died. Everybody. Right. Now, I've been widowed twice myself. I've lost lots of good friends. I've lost my dad. My mom has dementia now, so I'm in the process, the long process of losing her. Right, so and pets are we have lots of pets in our house, so we have lots of pet losses. So, but in my family growing up, loss was part of life. Right? We went and saw people who were dying. We went to the visitations. We went to the funerals. We went to the burials.
You paid your respects.
It was part of life. You know, and you could joke around in the limo on the way to the funeral because we were telling stories about the person who really died, not this fake person who died that everyone's talking about in church or wherever the service happens to be.
Right.
So to me, death should be part of life. For my kids, death is part of life. We have a joke in our family that when somebody dies, we go out for ice